Charles Dickens. A Christmas Carol in Prose. Abridged. The main character is an old, gloomy miser named Ebenezer Scrooge, who has long ceased to love anyone or anything except his own money. He does not understand the joy that other people feel because Christmas and the festive season are approaching, and he rudely rejects an invitation from his kind nephew to celebrate Christmas with him and his family. He cannot understand why people spend the whole day celebrating instead of working if it brings them no profit, and he refuses to donate money to charitable collectors, raising funds to help poor children. On Christmas Eve, Scrooge very reluctantly agrees to let his clerk leave work for Christmas, closes his office, and goes home. However, at home, he is suddenly confronted by the spirit of his deceased business partner, Jacob Marley, who died on Christmas Eve 7 years earlier. Marley's spirit tells Scrooge that after death, he was punished for failing in life to do good on earth and help other people, and he does not want the same fate to befall Scrooge. Therefore, at Marley's request, Scrooge will be visited by 3 spirits, whom Marley hopes will help him change. The spirits are to appear one after another over 3 nights, at 1 o'clock after midnight. After these words, Marley's spirit bids Scrooge farewell and disappears. At 1 o'clock after midnight, the first spirit appears. The spirit of Christmas past. He takes Scrooge back into the past. Scrooge sees the town where he was born and raised, everything so familiar to him from his youth. Then he sees himself as a child and a young man, when he was still full of enthusiasm, hope, and excitement, and was ready to share the good mood of the people close to him. Seeing himself like this, Scrooge gradually softens, and his heart begins to thaw. After that, however, he sees himself older, when greed had already begun to take root within him. Noticing this change, his former beloved decides to leave him, understanding that in his current cold and calculating state, he no longer needs the love of a poor girl whom he once loved when he himself was poor. She marries another man and builds her own family happiness. It is incredibly painful for Scrooge to watch himself from the outside, and he begs the spirit to take him away from these visions of the past. Eventually, the spirit disappears, and Scrooge falls asleep. On the second night, exactly at 1 o'clock after midnight, the second spirit appears. The spirit of Christmas present. He leads Scrooge through his town. Scrooge sees streets decorated for Christmas, cheerful and well-dressed people, shop shelves filled with Christmas treats. Everywhere there is abundance and joy because of the approaching holiday. Then the spirit takes Scrooge to the home of Bob Cratchit, the clerk who works in Scrooge's office. Bob is poor and has a large family with many children, yet here too there is joy and celebration. Only once is the general happiness disturbed. When Bob proposes a toast to Scrooge's health, Bob's wife joins the toast very reluctantly, saying that if it were not for Christmas, she would never drink to the health of that unpleasant and indifferent miser. This is the first toast of the evening that the family does not drink with full sincerity. At this moment, Scrooge feels pity for Bob's sick and frail son, little Tiny Tim, whose death the spirit predicts if the future does not change. Next, Scrooge and the spirit travel to different places and see how Christmas is celebrated by miners and lighthouse workers. For a time, everyone forgets their quarrels and hardships. There is joy on every face, and people wish one another a Merry Christmas. Finally, they arrive at the house of Scrooge's nephew, where various cheerful games and amusements have already begun. The nephew is perhaps the only person in the whole town who bears no resentment toward his gloomy and rude uncle. Despite everything, he sincerely wishes Scrooge a Merry Christmas and hopes that one day he will become kinder and change. Scrooge himself, invisible to all, watches the festivities with pleasure and even wants to join in, but the spirit does not allow him the time. He brings Scrooge back home and disappears. At last, the third spirit appears. He speaks not a single word, but Scrooge understands that this is the spirit of Christmas yet to come, and that he has come to show him his possible future. In the future, Scrooge is surprisingly absent from the stock exchange and other places he once frequented. Instead, he constantly hears passers-by talking about the death of some old, hateful miser whom no one loved. Many openly rejoice at his death. 3 thieves have robbed the dead man's house and sold his belongings to a fence in the slums, remarking that he must have driven everyone away in life so that we could profit from him after his death. Then Scrooge sees the dead man himself, but does not see his face. He asks the spirit to tell him the dead man's name, realizing that the same fate could await him after death. It turns out that the hated miser is Scrooge himself. He brought no good to anyone during his life, and even if people do not curse his memory, they treat his death with restrained relief. The third spirit disappears, and Scrooge finds himself once again in his own bed. He finally decides to change for the better. He sincerely rejoices that Christmas is approaching and praises the festive season. He sends the most expensive Christmas goose to poor Bob Cratchit and donates a large sum to the same charitable collectors whom he had recently driven away. After that, Scrooge goes to celebrate Christmas with his nephew, who joyfully welcomes him. The next day, when Bob comes to work, Scrooge raises his salary. From that time on, Scrooge becomes the kindest and most generous man in the city, earning universal love and respect. For little Tiny Tim, Bob Cratchit's son, he becomes a second father, and the child fully recovers and does not die from illness. And because Scrooge changes, the future of both himself and those close to him also changes for the better.